All right, here today with longtime industry vet Frank Rizzo with Stone Capital. Frank, you've been in the mobile home park industry for 12-ish years now at this point, right?
That's right, Jeff.
Nice. You've been through some of the cycles and ridden it all out just fine, which not hard to do in mobile home park space, which you and I both appreciate about the industry. But I'm sure it's definitely changed a lot since when you first got into the game.
There's been a monstrous shift, I think, in the past 10 years in terms of not just in how we look at parks and how we've evolved, but just in the industry as a whole. I think that there's been a tremendous shift, and I think a lot of it is to the benefit, and it's forced everybody to up their game in terms of what they're putting out in terms of a product or the type of communities they want to run. So it's been a very exciting time to be in the industry.
Right. What are the biggest changes you've seen?
I think number one is the new entrants that are into the space, right? So that is when we, when I was first introduced to the manufactured housing space, and it was predominantly, I mean, 80% dominated by mom and pop. And now a lot of those communities have gone away. I mean, and they've transitioned out to more of a, if not institutional, but more professionally run communities. So from the mindset of originally we would look at mom and pop operators as our, initial target, we've seen that we'll sometimes look at some semi-professional operators that we would have found some opportunities with. And I think the new capital has created some opportunities and challenges. Right? Some of the opportunities is it's forced you to raise your game. Like, how can I really make these communities better and create some value for the residents down on the ground? And then on the negative side, it has brought in some people who are just look at this through the lens of a spreadsheet rather than you know the impact that it has on the people on the ground. And I think that's some of what we as an industry have to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So what's interesting about it, because I hear a lot of people talk, and I'm guilty of it too. I look back to people who were doing this 10 years ago, and I look at some of what some of the purchase prices back then were, and I'm like, man, I wish I would have been doing this then. But it had to be, it was in an earlier stage of the industry. So was it tougher to get, banks involved with this and get investors because it just wasn't as popular back then?
You hit the nail on the head because at first, when I'm based in New York, and I grew up, kind of JVing or flipping properties with a pool of investors that were local. And when I explained to them that, hey, this is the pivot we're making, and we're going to acquire these manufactured housing communities or trailer parks and 800 miles away in towns that they never heard of, it wasn't as I didn't find a very warm reception to the idea or the concept, and we really had to explain the process of what we were going to do and the thesis of why we were going to do it. And it really took some time for that proof of concept. And I look back on it, Jeff, and that first deal I did with my partner, down in Alabama. I mean, it was our smallest deal, but it was like pulling teeth to the last minute to get the deal funded. We were probably underfunded for the capex work we had to do, but and the people who were doing it were probably doing it just because of our relationship and almost to shut me up. Like, all right, you want to try this, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But now the idea behind it is not as foreign, and I think people are more receptive, and they understand that this is really attainable housing for a vast swath of the country, that we are putting people on a path to home ownership, and they understand that we're community building rather than just owning a trailer park in some area they never heard of.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's not the perfect solution, right? It would be great if everybody could get a stick-built house that was extremely affordable, but I think it's the best solution. And I think a lot of people in the industry share that same sentiment.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I'm I believe we need a lot more of yes on a lot of different levels, but I do believe that this is, and you talk about some of the changes, even the product that's put out there now by the manufacturers are night and day from where it was just a decade ago. And for the resident that coming in on the outside, you might know it's a manufactured home, but once you step inside those doors, some of those new homes, I mean, they've done a stellar job of, you know, in upping their game and creating a great experience for the resident.
So your first purchase was in Alabama and you're from New York. So that fascinates me because I lived in Alabama and man, when I grew up in Virginia, when I told people, yeah, I'm going to school in Alabama, they're like, what? What? Why would you go there? I think it's the most slept on state out there. I think it's awesome. And I don't like telling people how awesome it is because I want it to stay awesome. But how did that opportunity come up for you? And like what motivated you to go after that property?
So interestingly enough, when I tell people how much I love Alabama from here, I get the same kind of reaction, and they don't understand exactly how beautiful the state is. And there's such, from the Gulf Shores up to the north of Alabama, you have mountains, and the people there are just wonderful, right? They're just the most down to earth people that you will find. What happened was I had been involved in a mobile home park a few years prior with a family who I was helping leave New York. And it kind of captured my attention, and it was something that I was involved with. I was managing, I was operating, I had a piece of, and we did very well with it. And at some point, around 2016, just realized that New York City was probably not the place for an investor like myself to be able to scale and to be able to withstand some of the things that we saw happening or coming down the pike. So I used the network that I had built up, and being a broker, I had some broker relationships, and they kind of gave me some different opportunities to take a look at. And I grabbed my partner. I said, "Listen, I think we should revisit this mobile home park scenario. Why don't you take a ride with me?" And we took a 17-hour barnstorming tour throughout the Southeast, and we were looking at a couple of different parks, and we hit on something in Jacksonville, Alabama, not to be confused with Jacksonville, Florida, right? Which a lot of people, it's like, oh, you're in Florida. Like, no, Alabama. But that was our first acquisition in Alabama, and I've been in the state since then. And quite frankly, it's to your point. I think it's a sleeper. I think there's a lot of great things that are happening there, and you can find value, on the acquisition front. But if you manage it and you understand that market correctly, you can create some real value for yourself and for your investment.
Right. So how many lots was that first one?
That was 31 units. It was all park owned homes. We had 24 homes when we acquired the park that we also acquired. And the day that we closed on the park, they had a park manager there, and he basically quit on us. So now we thought we had an operation. I had self-managed the other part. All of a sudden now he's gone, and I'm down in a market where we don't really have a lot of friends, and we're trying to figure it out from 800 miles away.
I've been there. It is not fun. It is not fun. It's tough with the managers too because so many times they put on such a good front when you're under contract and maybe you meet them once or twice and they kind of treat it like a job interview, right? They're excited to meet you as the new potential owner. And some of them, I get the sense immediately that they just start telling me about how bad the place is. Like, man, all hell's going to break loose when you close on this. And then we close and it's fine. It's like, oh, they're probably telling the same thing to that current owner, making them think it's a lot worse than it is. I mean, we've had that a couple of times where they just totally overhype how bad things are. And then we get in there, we're like, this is fine. It's like a protection reflex for them to tell us that it's a super bad property. So we know that we need them or something like that.
I think that part of it is setting expectations, right? So now they can always outperform it. And part of it is maybe they just want to let you know everything, right? So if something happens down the road, it kind of, absolves them of, hey, what did I know about that? But, we found, listen, if I look back, a lot of it was, maybe some of it was us. Like we went in there and, having, Jeff, I mean, this business is not about bricks and sticks. It's about people. And maybe we've just gotten better over time of knowing what we want and what our expectations and what what we can do and how we can offer assistance to people on the ground, and knowing if someone's going to make work in our system or not, right? And I think that's a big key to it, right? Because this business is really a people's business. It's not a brick and stick business.
Especially because people stay there so long. I mean, I have some friends who do multifamily, and I have to explain to them, it's like, I'm buying a neighborhood. You know, it's a mobile home park, but these people have, some of them have lived there 40 years and they know everybody super well. You don't get that with apartments. People leave once their family grows and they outgrow it. So it's definitely unique, and it's one of those things that it can be tough to, the first impressions are everything. And if you come down there and you don't do a good job in the beginning of showing them that you care about the community, you suffer for years because your just first impression is like, oh, this is just some slumlord landlord. He doesn't care about us. He's just after the money. And it makes the entire rest of the time that you own that property a headache.
That's a great point, and I think I don't think a lot of people get that, right? And you've probably seen, not only as you as an owner, but as a broker, you probably heard that enough from people behind, and people don't realize that you are buying a community. I mean, this is community development 101, right? And if you
Yeah.
want to have an impact, there's no greater impact that you could have in a real estate investment than owning a mobile home park, because you are, the people who own those homes, it's their largest asset that they own, and they're owning it on your land. And how you operate it and how you elevate it is going to make a big impact on their life and their livelihood.
Have you found that typically, do you guys buy? I'll ask this question first. Do you guys buy some of the parks that need a lot of work to get them
Yeah,
increased in value?
we tend to be, deep value add investors. We look for situations where we could elevate the community and force appreciation through some strategic investment, whether that's in infrastructure, beautification, bringing in amenities, making improvements to elevating kind of the culture and standards of the homes and the housing stock that's already in place, which we think is, significantly important into what we do and something we factor into our underwriting. So we're typically looking to buy those communities, and you going to find them at a discount, but it also means that you have to roll up your sleeves and do the work, right, to make that happen.
It's a really interesting thing because it's such a strange asset, because what you're doing is a lot of times these parks, they have got their rents so low that the owner gives up on maintaining everything. And so now you have to be the bad guy and come in here and say, hey, I know he was charging you $100 a month. That made sense in 1980. This is 2020. We have to maintain things. And at the first deal I did, I was terrified to go around and raise the rents. But it was shocking how when I started telling people what we were planning on doing, everybody was excited. There was a few people who ended up moving out coincidentally. I guess they're just, there's any stretch of the population, you have the certain population that just doesn't care. But tenants are receptive to it. Like 9 times out of 10, you talk to a tenant about what you're going to do to their property. Yes, it's going to cost more, but we're going to give you a much better product. Their home is difficult to move. This is their neighborhood. They've lived there for years. They're excited for it.
Well, Jeff, you hit the nail on the head when you're being transparent with them, right? The reason why the community has bad roads is because there wasn't enough money to do the roads, right? Or the reason why those trees haven't been cut and you're worried about them, the limbs hanging over your home, is because there's not enough money for the owner to do that work. So I think we've taken a very similar approach where, and this being maybe one of the differences from the beginning, we would always go in and we would do our work first, because we never believe that because we put our name on the deed, there's our value add, right? We have to show the residents what we want to do first. And then when we went with increases, it was more readily acceptable because, hey, I don't have to spend, $500 to get my struts redone because the roads are paved, right? I don't have that. I'm not worried about a tire blowout because the roads are done. Or I know that the place has been cleaned up because we got rid of all the junk homes. So there's a value in that. And I think part of that also is being transparent of, here's our competitors, here's where we are. We're still offering you a comparative value, right, to being in there. working with legacy residents, not, you know, day one. I mean, do you go day one right to market, or are you stepping them up?
Not to market. No, not to market. Typically it's we're so far beneath in some of the ones I've bought. Like we'd be tripling it if we took it to market a lot of the times. It's like even if it's economically justified, I'm not trying to make the local news. Like we're not trying to do that. But we do basically announce it the first day in conjunction with what we're going to do. And it's usually like a 60, 90-day period until that starts. But I've done it both ways. When I first started doing deals, it was just myself and my partner's personal money. And so we'd close with like the exact amount in our account to get the property closed. And then it just took us too long to do the improvements because we were just using the actual lot rent to do it. Now it's much different. We come in with the money just day one to go do everything we want to do. And it's much smoother. Like years into it, the tenants are happy because they immediately saw an increase in the quality of their life and their living standards for the extra money, so they associate it with it. So it's I've kind of gone both ways on it. I've when I brokered, there were some people I knew who would take it way too far, way too quick. And as somebody who wants to hold it for perpetuity, I'm not trying to piss everybody off. Like there's a fine line, and like how quickly can you fix this versus how quickly do you need to get rents to where they are.
I think that's to me that's the right approach, because if you're buying those value add properties, typically there's infill, right? You're going to lose residents the first year once you make those changes anyway, because once you raise the standards, there's always going to be a segment of that population that doesn't want to, doesn't want to clean up their lot, right? They don't want to deal with rules. They don't want to keep their dog on a leash. They don't, whatever the case is, and they're going to leave. And that infill you can bring to market, right? So, I'm going to have a segment that's going to be at market anyway, but with the legacy residents, I have to show them some value and understand that they were probably in some substandard situations, and I'll give them some time to get there. Like one of the things we started doing would be even on homes that we don't own, and we found a lot less pushback is, you know what? If I told them that they had a skirt, because that's now the standard, but if I did the skirting for them, or I cool sealed their roof, or I fixed their deck, I could also, instead of you paying $3,000 to do that work, I'll do it. It's part of my underwriting. But now if I went to you at a higher lot rent, well, you've already got something for it, right? So you've gotten some value. It would have cost you more money, right, than you would have, but you're paying it basically over time, and I'm getting the value of the lot rent, but I'm giving you something for it. And I think when you work with that mindset, it makes it easier, I think, for there to be acceptance for the resident, and it just, to your point earlier, just it allows you to own that asset long term with a symbiotic relationship.
Have you ever found that the tenants who are already maintaining, because in every park, the worst park you can imagine, there's still the house that's nice. Have they ever been upset that you're helping other people if their house didn't need help?
You know what? I think though, because you're right, you always have that, regardless of the community, you always have like that pocket, that somebody who's been there for and remembers the glory days, right? And they've kept the house like that. I think they appreciate it because, at the end of the day, the value of that home is the land that it's on, right? I mean, there's an NADA value, but the value of that home is the land that it's on. And if you want to ever leave or sell or rent, if the rest of those homes are nice and well kept, you're going to get more value for your home. So I'm also going to, by me doing that work or you doing that work, we're going to help the value of their home, and we're going to help them improve. So I think that's a key point, and that's where I think for even the residents that might not get all of those benefits, they'll appreciate the fact that their community has been upgraded.
The same concept as an HOA, right? Nobody likes, rules, and everybody likes to make fun of their HOA, but we all buy mostly in communities with HOAs because we know they enforce the rules, and it's statistically proven across the board it keeps property values up. It's the same thing with, and what you're saying exactly right. And it just have you noticed like a natural filter when you buy a park and you start fixing it, that the tenant quality just starts going up?
Correct. I think they take, no one will ever care for your property more than you will. And when you take better care of it, they take better care. They have a pride of ownership. When people own their homes, they have a pride of ownership anyway. But it's a challenge always being the one that's taking their garbage pail in if everybody else is leaving their garbage out, right? And I'm going to have to clean the lot anyway because someone. So that's a challenge for anybody, right? And we understand that because we've all been in that scenario. So if you can create that standard, I think to your point, people like structure. People like knowing there's freedom in that structure and that stability, and they want to know that that community is being well run. So we focus on what we do best, which is running really well organized, efficient communities that's going to create a lot of value for the residents and obviously create a lot of value for us and the stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many parks are you guys up to today?
So currently we own 17 communities. We've owned and operated 27 communities throughout our cycle, but we have 17 communities throughout 3 states right now. We're in Georgia, Alabama.
It's like a pretty tight geographic area. North Carolina is, I guess, a few states away, but
Well, it's same. I mean, we're concentrated right now in the southeast. I mean, we're looking at some expansion opportunities in some neighboring states. But as you know, the last couple of years has been, the challenge has been that delta between buyers and sellers, right? And trying to bridge that gap. So we haven't had the transactional velocity, right? That you everyone would love to have. But we think the opportunities we found during this period of time have probably been deeper or more fruitful. So we were excited about what we were able to do. But I don't know how you're seeing the market. We are starting to see the market open up a little bit and the opportunity set becoming a little bit uh, more advantageous for us to move forward.
right. It seemed like when the rates went up, everybody thought it was just going to be temporary, myself included. And so people were just like, "Well, this is what I'm asking, and rates are going to come back down, so buy now." And I was guilty of it too. I started looking at the deals I was doing, this year and last year, and it's like these just don't cash flow as well as they used to. And then I look at my numbers. It's like, well, my interest rate's 3.5 times or 3.5 points higher. Like my basis is better, and I'm buying for the long term. So I'd prefer a basis and a higher interest rate, which I don't know. We'll see how things go as the market changes. And I think what's good about it is it seems like a lot of these mom and pops, some of them still have those life events they need to sell, and basically 2020 to 2023, if they didn't have a major life event, if they can, not sorry, not 2023, yeah, but about that time frame when rates really went up, um, they just they had no motivation to sell. Right, they're free and clear. They've owned it 20 years, even if it's run into the ground, they're not doing anything, so they just waited.
And I think what's happened is, especially in the last few years, and you've seen it from the broker space. Like a lot of people came in, wholesalers. They would come in and they would punch out numbers on to these community owners, and now that price gets anchored in their head. And it doesn't matter that they haven't put boots on the ground, that by the time they people started really dissecting what was there, that number would change. So, I always tell everybody this is a business of it's a business of attrition, right? Because a lot of the opportunities we end up getting, it's because they had to go through 2 or 3 cycles with somebody else to realize that our number was really the right number. Because someone might come in, like we just went into a contract in the deal in Mobile, Alabama, originally was out there at a higher price. Somebody made an offer at that. They came in, they looked at the number, deal got pushed back. Comes back to the market, somebody else gets in there. They're trying to wholesale. Deal gets pushed back. So finally, they come back to us because they know that we can get it to the finish line, and we know that when we start peeling back the layers of the onion, we're not going to be shocked at what we see. Right? We've had those conversations with them. We understand, we're going to have to fill some gaps in the underwriting because it's not going to be perfect. It was mom and pop, and you have someone on, you have a tenant that's been collecting rent and it's been doing, all the mom and pop stories, Jeff, that I'm sure you're very familiar with, but it's not institutional or professionally run. And we're going to be able to plug in those gaps because we're comfortable enough with the market and we're comfortable enough with the space to know what these numbers really mean. And I think that's the nuance that makes MHP investing a lot different than multifamily or industrial or, commercial retail, anything like that.
Yeah, it's a simple asset, but it's also really easy to get it wrong. And I can't tell you how many deals I've had, I wouldn't say killed, but ruined by a residential realtor being the one who lists it. And they just say, oh, it's 50 park owned homes. Let me Google how to value commercial real estate. They put a cap rate on it. It's like twice what the property would actually sell for. Um, and you have to be like, I'm not a low baller. I don't believe in it. I've never had to low ball because there's so much value you can add to a community that's run to the ground. Like you don't have to. Typically, I feel like I'm paying more than the property's worth. But in these cases, it's like, it doesn't matter how many times we explain the numbers to that residential broker, sometimes commercial brokers too that aren't mobile home specialists, but it's just in the seller's head now. They heard a real estate professional with a license tell them that's the case, and they just take it as fact. Well, it's like, well, anytime you get your real estate license, you have to. There's a section in there about how you're not supposed to sell things you don't have an expertise in. But I always am an advocate that commercial real estate and residential real estate should have different licenses because it's completely different. Like I took 168 hours of the course to get licensed in Colorado. There's like a 40-minute section about commercial. It's like that's not enough. It's a complicated space. You gotta really know what you're doing.
And if, we could, from the broker's perspective, if you don't have that right person representing you who understands the nuances of what you're doing, it could cost you money one way or the other, right? You could either pay too much or you could sell it for too little. And it's, that's the challenge with not having the right person or the right professional to kind of guide you during that period.
What would you say is the toughest challenge you've had when turning around?
It's a great question. I think there's two challenges that you have. I mean, number one, you have to make sure that in your underwriting, that you have enough capital for your capex plan, right? That is number one. And to your point, on your first deal, having just enough money. I mean, on our first deal, we had just enough money, right, to get it done, a little bit of reserve. So now, from that point, we always made sure that when we were acquiring a community, that we had enough reserves, and then over what we thought we needed, just to make sure that we weren't underfunded. So that's number one. And then number two is you have to be realistic in the expectations and of your timelines, because you know and we looked at a statistic like 75% of the projects nationwide are like over time and over budget, right? And that's just what happens when you get into one of those projects, because there's so many different variables that you have, whether it's, if you're infilling, you need a plumber, you need an electrician, right? You have to set the lot, you've got to get the movers, you got to get everything. There's so many different variables, so you have to be realistic in the timelines that you're setting and the expectations of where it's going to be, because especially when you're penciling out that deal, it can make or break it, right? Because you want to make sure that that time value of money is correctly accounted for. So you don't want to be overly aggressive in what you can accomplish inside of that time frame. So I mean, that's a challenge that we're always looking at. Okay, what's the time frame? Where do we expect it to be? What happens if it's longer, right? What could possibly go wrong and what could delay that? So I think you have to always look at it from that vantage point, because, Murphy's Law, anything that could happen probably will.
Right, right. Yeah, I found that to be especially true when it comes to infill. Like if you wanted to, when I first got started, I was just so eager to see the property get filled up so I could look at my spreadsheet and say, oh, here's what it's worth now. But I can't go to Walmart and spend my equity that I have on this spreadsheet, right? And I was just blowing through cash that we should have been setting aside to do that. And what I found is if you just make consistent progress and you give yourself 3 years instead of 1 year, you start to have people move in and you don't have to, cover their moving costs or the other stuff you do when you try to speed it up. And so that's probably when we're going to refinance anyway, because the banks aren't going to be super optimistic and eager to refi 1 year later, or, sell it 1 year later, whatever it might be. So it's so hard. It's easier now that I've got a couple of properties that I know I don't want to do that much to them all that fast. But when I had just one, it was like every weekend I was out there like, oh, I'm going to build a bus stop this weekend. Oh, I'm going to do this weekend. And my partners are like looking at all the money I'm spending just on like DeWalt tools. Like, oh my gosh, I probably spent like $10,000 on different types of tools and equipment the first year. And it's like, it was unnecessary. Just looking back, it was totally unnecessary.
And you have to catch yourself, and that's a great point. You have to catch yourself of like I need it and I want it, and then what's the cost and what's that value that's going to come back from it. So and it's measuring that against where you expect that community to be. And sometimes, we're in a business of nickels and dimes. So there's a lot of things that you might want to do, but it doesn't necessarily all have to be rolled out to your point day one, right? You can get there over time, and it's always nice to say over time we're going to add a couple more benches, maybe a couple of grills, maybe, and the park is changing or evolving, and residents will appreciate that. So that's always something to take a look at to make sure that, hey, what do I need to get through this phase, and what will that look like?
How do you guys do most of your infill? Do you do strictly new homes when you're trying to fill up lots, or do you do used homes as well?
So we have filtered out like and we've done both, right? You brought in resale homes. You look at, I mean, bringing in new homes is obviously cleaner, right? Even though the cost of those homes are more, you can put that on your line, you could finance those homes. And it definitely upgrades the park. When you bring in resale homes, it's very capital intensive because for most of the time you're laying out the capital to bring that home in, and typically those homes need some level of work. So you have to be very sure of the type of work that you could be there, because you could bring in a resale home and all of a sudden you're into that home for 35 or $40,000 for a home that might not even be worth that, quite frankly. So that could be a very costly move. Ideally, we'd want to be able to bring in new homes, but to that point, not every home is a new home market. And I think when rates were low, we saw some operators bringing in new homes everywhere. It didn't matter whatever the market was, regardless of the demographics or the economic demographic. They were bringing in new homes, and that doesn't necessarily work because you have to make sure there's a difference between the median value of homes in that market and the new home you're bringing in, right? There has to be a difference. There has to be a difference between comparable rents. So we're very conscious of where we're going to do infill because that's, the economic data will kind of lead you in that direction.
Right. If you just act like, hey, I'm going to move to this area, what would I rather do? And I've looked at that too. It's like if I were to buy a home for 60 grand and move it into this park and pay $400 lot rent, 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't have done it because I probably could have found a piece of land and got a loan from the home dealership to do that, and it would have been cheaper. Whereas now, not the case. So like a single family, 3 bed, 2 bath site built home, it's going to cost you a fortune. Like no matter what market you're in, it's going to be a expensive monthly payment. But that spread between the two, like between buying a new mobile home and moving into a park, even at a higher lot rent, it's far cheaper. And that's one of the, I mean, it sounds like you and I are kind of in similar markets where they're not, it's not the Huntsville. It's not, I mean, you might have some stuff in Huntsville, but like, it's not, one of them big major cities. And so we do have to be super aware of that. If we're going to be an affordable option, it doesn't make sense if it's not more affordable than something else.
Correct. Correct. And we found like to bring in new homes, we typically like to see the median sale price in that area be over 190, right? If the median sale price is at 120, 130, we've seen some, I mean, they look like great values to buy, but it's an infill project and the median sale price is $119,000. Well, unless I'm going to lay out the cash to find, and then you have to source those homes and you have to find them and you have to move. But to bring in new homes in that market, someone's going to buy a traditional stick built house. There's not enough of a difference, or it'll be more expensive to live in the community, and that won't work.
Right. Yeah. And it's easy as the park owner to just be optimistic and just be like, oh, I love it. And then as soon as I always do that exercise, it shows me like, oh, okay, now I see why. One thing I've done a fair amount of, but it's still capital intensive, and it's tricky because it can go bad pretty quick. But we'll buy a used home, and we're really selective on what we buy. We'll set it there and we'll sell it as a handyman special. And first time I did it, it was just a home run. The guy who bought it just he was a carpenter. He just totally knocked it out of the park. And for me, I was like, man, this was awesome. Then I did it a second time and the guy didn't do anything. So I basically sold him this home and he wouldn't skirt it. He wouldn't put steps on it. So it's gotten a lot. It's hard to scale. Like bringing in new homes. I mean, bring 10 homes. I don't care. It's the same process. Those used homes, it's tougher. Have you found any tips or tricks into when it comes to used homes, like how you actually get them in and have them not be a detriment to the community?
So to your point, I mean, we used to go to, depending on the county we were in, we'd go to the tax auctions, which was a great way to pick up some of those homes, to bring them in. We like to offer incentives for people who want to move their homes in, right? So we know that if we're bringing in a home, there's a setup cost that we're going to pay anyway, right? If I'm bringing in a home, a new home, I've got to set it, I've got to connect it, I've got to get if there's no pedestal, I got to put a pedestal in there. Maybe I have to bring in an HVAC unit. There's a whole slew of things that we have to do. If someone's willing to bring in their home, then we're willing to give them a credit. If they use we'll have movers, plumbers, electricians in every area. If they use the people that we use, we'll cover a cost of that. And it's a very cost effective way for us to fill in that lot. And we look at that if they come in there and they're obviously signing a lease for 36 months, we know that we're going to recover that the initial outlay, but we're also going to get the value of that lot. So that's something that's key for us. And then when we have homes that are handyman specials, we've had the same issue. Like some people do the work, some people won't. We try to be a little bit more discerning of, hey, this is coming in. These are all the defects of the home. This home is not habitable. What's your plan to fix it? And if you don't have a plan to fix it, then, this home is, I don't want to put anybody in a position where they're going to fail. Right. So we want to make sure that they have a pathway to success and that they have a plan to go in there and do that. So we like to know that there's kind of they've got a contractor, they've got the capital to do the work that's deemed necessary to make that home, that house a home, essentially.
Right. I've tried so many different strategies to get this done. And to date, the most effective, it was the simplest, where we would just text all of our tenants $1,000 cash bonus if they refer anybody who moves their own home in. That's brought in more people than anybody. All the creative stuff I did, all the market research I did, that good old word of mouth is honestly what gets it done a lot of the times.
You have to have that, and you have a good community if the residents there are referring people there, right? Because they're not going to do it if it's not run right. So that's a key point. That's a great point that you're doing there, Jeff.
And they refer good people. And it's a good filter. It's almost always the tenants that we love. And when they refer someone, people associate with people like them. We still vet them, obviously, but have you ever done any RV parks, or are you guys just mobile home?
So interestingly enough, we stayed away from it a lot of years, and we bought our first community that was hybrid. And so but it was kind of a hodgepodge, right? The owner's grandson owned the park. He kind of homes, RV, home RV. It was just, so we cleared up the sight lines, and we just relaunched the RV section probably about 3 weeks ago, after about a year and a half worth of infrastructure work that we had on site. So we're excited that this will be the first, hybrid MH RV park that we have. I mean, we do have a spattering of RVs, but this is like a legit RV park with a 20-acre lake, fishing pond, amenity center, washer, dryers section. So we're really excited about that. And we're starting to see the bookings come through. We just did a huge open house, community open house weekend. So the response has been very, very strong. We're right off of 231, which is the pathway to the Florida Panhandle. And we have, really
Is that
high.
in Troy?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've driven by it a bunch.
Okay.
Every time I'd go from Auburn to what do you call it, to Panama City or Pensacola, I'd always drive by it. So I know
That's
exactly
it.
which one you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So if you ever want to stop into Walnut Creek, if you got your RV, let me know. Be happy to make some accommodations for you. But it's we're really excited for that, and we're looking at um, adding an RV component to one of the communities we have in North Carolina as well.
Nice. Did you find that it was cheaper per lot to develop an RV site versus a mobile home site?
So you still, I mean, you're still bringing your electric in there, which is going to cost, that's going to cost. Lot prep. The advantage is you're not doing an additional parking pad, right, on that. So you a little bit of a savings there. You still have your connections, which obviously your sewer connections, whether you're doing septic, you're doing less impactful. So there's some cost savings there as well. But MH typically is valued more, right? So you're saving a little bit more on the front end. MH is a little bit, there's a better value per pad on MH Park. So for us, it was a blend, and it's a different. We always felt there was going to be a different skill set. So we always before we took on this business, because essentially it's a business, we wanted to make sure that we had our operations and systems set up everywhere else, and we were comfortable to do an add-on here. So we just felt we were at the point where we could do this, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because the RVs I've looked into it as well too, and what always gets me is like the initial sticker shock of like, man, I could rent an RV lot for this, and I could get a couple more in there. But being a mobile home guy, we don't have the kind of brain that it takes a lot of times to figure out what do you actually net because it's not going to be occupied 100% of the
Right.
time. Your expense ratio is not going to be super low like it is with parks. You're going to have to work more to get people in there because they can just hook their truck up and leave. And so it seems like a crutch a lot of times, but I've seen people who doing it the right way, and it can seem like a great thing if it's thought through well. A lot of times I'll see people just say, "Oh, we'll just let RVs come in," and then it becomes kind of this hodgepodge mess where it's hard to figure out what the thing's worth because it's like, okay, well, I like this, but 40% of these people are just RVs stuck on mobile home lots. They might just leave. I don't know what's going on here.
And that's one of the reasons why we stayed away from it for so long. We wanted to make sure that if we went into this, we went into this. Like we understood has to be run separately. You could run it parallel, but it's got to be run separately, and you've got to make sure that you're running it as where to your point as a business, not just kind of like hodgepodge here. So we felt we were comfortable at this point. That park itself, we always loved the site, the infrastructure, the layout, the topography. So if we were ever going to do it, that was the place to do it at, and we're pretty excited as to what this is going to be.
Yeah, Troy's a cool spot. I really like it. It's a big military town, which is always nice. But yeah, it's a cool place. Where do you think the? I mean, you've obviously been in the industry for a while, so you've seen it evolve to where it is today. Where do you think it's going to go in the next 10 years?
I think the interesting point in this space is that there's a finite number of communities that are available. So they're not every year we close more parks than we build. Fact. I don't think affordable housing, our nationwide affordable housing crisis, I don't think that's going to resolve overnight. I think we have an issue. We have not built enough homes in this country. That is a fact, right? And we have a younger population that's looking for places to go. So I think you're going to continue to see capital flow into this space, and I think that it's going to lead to a consolidation where the mom and pop or the sometime MHP operators kind of going to be a little bit more of a distant memory, and this is going to be um, more standardized, institutionalized. I think that's a reality, right? Especially in some of these markets where now you're going down to the third generation who might not even live in that market anymore. So they're going to look for exits, and I think more professional investors are going to come into the space, which is going to have its pluses or minuses. So I think that's something that's very real. And that trend I think is going to continue over the next 10 years. I also think that we're going to see some different housing varieties that are going to come out there, whether it's um, park models, whether it's more modular, that's going to come in there and 3D printed homes. So there's going to be some different varieties that's going to come out, um, to address this affordable housing crisis that we have in this country. But I think it's a great time to be in this space. I'm glad that we entered when we did, because I think that there's still a lot of value that could be had and there's always opportunity in addressing problems. And we're helping solve a very big problem that this country has in affordable housing.
Right. Do you see a point where there's so few mom and pops and the operators out there are doing a good enough job that there's not opportunities for you guys to keep acquiring new deals?
So, you know, that's like the fear of missing out, right? And I think sometimes everybody, yeah, oh, did I miss my opportunity in the space? I should have bought more. Listen, we've done what we've done. Do I look back and say, shoulda, woulda, coulda? I mean, you could say that about anything. I do think that in anything you do, there'll always be opportunity for people who are willing to look for it because there'll be operators that come in that fail, right? That could not do it. That maybe they had wrong expectations or they paid wrong or they had bad debt or maybe they just weren't managing it correctly. So there'll always be that opportunity that opens up. I do think it will be as things consolidate, I do think it will get tighter. And I do think you have to be, sometimes you have to be a little bit more creative in terms of what you're doing. Like, so we have a couple of communities where we know we can expand, right? So we're working on expansion, perhaps. So maybe, we can get the adjoining land, we can expand the existing park. So it's not ground up development, but it's an expansion play, which meets a need without having to do ground up waiting for entitlement, and it's a little easier for a city or a community to approve that rather than doing something ground up.
Yeah, it's personally, I think we may finally see some development. I don't. It's a tough thing to develop too because I mean a lot of the parks that were built were not developed. They were just somebody's land and they just let homes move in over the course of several decades. And that's kind of a hard thing to mimic if you're trying to be a professional investor and raise money and get people returns they need. But I think that we're seeing such a it is so unattainable to get the American dream at this point for so many of the people in this country. I think that we may finally see a shift if things don't change quickly or change in a bigger fashion. I think we will see some groups out there start to develop parks. And I think it'll be a weird. I won't. I don't think like major cities are going to be for it because fundamentally there's always going to be a better use for raw land than a mobile home park in a city. But I mean, a lot of the parks I have are in counties and there wasn't really much of an entitlement process. I think we might see more of that. It's something I've kind of got my ear to the ground of is trying to make sure if that trying to test that out and see if that might be something in the future that is an option.
I think there's certain areas where this will work. But to your point, I think in the cities, I think they're looking for a higher tax base, and that's one of the reasons why they don't like manufactured housing, and they're closing it down because they'd rather build luxury apartments. But quite frankly, it's a better lifestyle when you have nobody above you, and you have nobody behind you, and you have a backyard, and you have a grill, and you have like that's higher quality of life. And if you put out a good product and you have a community that has amenities, whether it's a playground or pool or community center, I mean, people like that, right? People appreciate that, and they appreciate the fact that they're not on top of everybody, that they have their own space. And the key, though, is that they need the space, right? You need the land to be able to do that. But I'm hopeful that I know certain areas are building these communities, and hopefully that you'll see some more of it. Correct? I think you're correct. I think we will see more development over the next few years.
I lived in Auburn, Alabama for a while, and it was somebody told me this who was building a park from just raw land to a park, and they were saying at that point in time they had more mobile home lots under the development process than they had apartment units, which was like the only city in the country to be that case. It's a total unicorn though of mobile home park markets. I'm sure you're probably somewhat familiar with Auburn. It's just there's these like student parks, which was my first exposure to it. When I went to Auburn, some of my friend freshman year had mobile homes. I was like, what are you doing?
Those are beautiful communities there.
Oh man, they're so
Beautiful.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
they got pickleball courts. They've got pools and they got Tiger
Yes.
Transit, so they just ride right over to school. And it's it's honestly super fun. I mean, some of them with the highest lot rent there now is $810. And it's still like a really good option because what people will do is their parents buy them the house. The kid will be responsible for the lot rent. They have two buddies in the other two units. They cover the lot rent by paying $400 a month each. So the student of the parent or the kid of the parents is kind of living for free. And then when they move out, they sell the home, and the parents don't. Sometimes they make money, sometimes they lose money, but it's not like they paid 4 years of $1,000 a month rent, and so it works. It's interesting, and again, I don't think the whole city there is behind it. Like they love the mobile home parks. So many people who live there lived in those parks when they went to college, so they get it. And it's a different product than family parks because they'll be right next to a door to a family park, and you could tell immediately. Like there doesn't have to be a single person outside. You could tell it's not college kids. But it's fascinating. I think we'll see. I think parks like that. I think if we see parks developed, they're going to be really, really nice ones, and they're going to be built and developed solely by park owners because apartment developers, they've got the skill to build much bigger projects and a much better use of their time. But park owners, I think a lot of them are just going to get to a point where they want to do value add, and they'd rather do some that they can find.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that's a great point. Because that does create, it's still the most affordable housing option there. So whether it's in a college town or somewhere where it's meeting that need for affordable housing, you could still put out a great product at even with the lot rent, at such a discount to where median home sale prices are across the country that people have to rediscover what it is to live in one of these communities. And they have to reimagine it by putting in, grade A, class A communities with amenities, curbs, beautification, things that will attract those type of people to manufactured housing.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of where I live in Denver, a lot of the developers are starting to go really small. I could tell 20 years from now, you're going to be able to spot which year these were built because it's the only time developers are building houses this small. But it's because that's what people can afford.
Sure.
Rates are high. What's interesting to me though, and you're probably a good person to ask this, rates are not like historically crazy. Like where we're at, for parks, we're 7.5%, 8%, depending on what you get. That's not historically out of the norm. So what do you think is causing this this lack of affordability?
Well, it's because the price, typically when the rates would go up, the prices would go down, right? Across the board. And what's happened is prices have there's a floor that's been set on that. So you have the higher rates, but you also have the higher pricing. So, I mean, I've been in real estate for 23 years. So when you had that, I mean, there was a noticeable drop when rates went up in 2008 to 2009. There was a noticeable drop in pricing, obviously with the Great Recession, but there was always that correlation. Interest rates have gone up and prices may have moderated, but they haven't declined. There wasn't that for single family homes. I mean, it was a very modest drop. And in our asset class, there was a very, very modest. I mean, other asset classes got dinged a little bit more, but for the most part, housing prices and rental prices, they plateaued. Maybe a slight decline. There wasn't that precipitous drop. And so with rates at that level, I think that's created that, the issue that people are having today. And it's still very expensive just to it's gotten better over the last few months, but it's just very expensive to live, quite frankly, whether it's food, gas, travel. It's been very, very pricey.
Right, the costs are high. I've seen a lot of the statistics. As there's some boomers out there who'll talk about how rates used to be 15% or whatever, and then they do the comparison of like what a payment on a house at the time was in relation to the salaries, and it was cheaper. So the rate's not the full story.
Yeah, correct. Rate on I bought a condo. My first thing I bought when I was 23, right? 22, 23. I paid 8%, but I paid 125,000 for the condo. Right. So it's a little bit of a difference. Not to date myself.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What year was that? No, I'm just kidding. Nice. So what are some of the biggest things that you guys are working on now? Do you guys have a good pipeline of new opportunities you guys are excited?
Yeah, we're Very excited. We just went into contract on that property in Mobile. Not a huge deal, but it's a great add-on because we're already in the market. We're looking to scale out. We're downstream on two other opportunities, one in a new market, which we're really excited about, and then another one that would tie into where we are in North Carolina. So, we're starting to see the opportunity pipeline open up for us, which is really exciting. Uh, and I think that that's going to get better. I think everything that's happened this year, I think people finally realize like, hey, this is rates, this is pricing, this is where we need to be. So if we want to make it, we want to exit, we've got to, sit back and start working with people. And also I think people who have gone through the cycle of having a deal, the deal died, having another deal. Now they're coming back and realizing that our pricing wasn't really off. We weren't, to your point earlier, we weren't lowballing them. We were just trying to tell them where market really is. So we're really excited about that opportunity set that we see opening up this summer.
Right. Yeah. As a broker, I can tell you some of the deals that were going on when it was low interest. I mean, you just look at it, and in the back of my head, I was kind of new, and I was thinking, maybe they just see something I don't. But to me, on the surface, like this doesn't make sense. And then fast forward a couple of years, it's like they're going to be in trouble because they definitely overpaid. Now they couldn't possibly have added enough value, especially when you factor in like those really, 200 lot parks where they were buying them at four caps, and now rates are for those at like 5.5, 6. Like I don't. To your point, there's going to be new opportunities. Maybe that's the new opportunity. Like historically, it's been all mom and pops. They're just free and clear. That's a different type of deal. We might see people who are facing balloon payments now, and they got to do something. And so there's going to be opportunities like that. But I think all in all, the competition is good for the space, right? It, like you said, it forces operators to do better. They can't be lazy. They've got to start, working on that muscle memory of making sure that their operations are really dialed in and they deliver for customers. But it's also going to, on the back end, most of us sell to somebody someday. It's going to be great to see prices of the properties improve as more and more people get in this space and are willing to pay more than they were before. So it's a double-edged sword. It's great, we can get loans better because more banks are interested in this. There's more buyers, but it's going to make it tougher, which is, challenge is a good thing, I think.
It's good, and you have to be, Jeff. You have to be, and as a broker, you have to be consistent. You have to be able to continue to go out there with the process of trying to find new opportunity. And even when we don't need to hit on everyone, but we have to make sure we hit on the ones we do, get hit on, right? So we have to make sure we're right when we're doing our underwriting, when we're doing our buying, when we're making our offers. So we're just consistent in looking at different opportunities in the market, keeping our database open, keeping conversation to open with either our network of brokers or our network of property owners that we speak with, to try to make sure that we're keeping abreast of what's happening and the opportunities that are there in the market. And then at the end of the day, we've got to operate once we own them, right? Like that's the second
Yeah.
portion of it. We got to make sure that we're doing what we say once we close on the park.
They're not passive. People make that mistake all the time thinking it's totally passive. It might be more than other assets, but if you take the approach, I'm guilty of this. On my first, I took the approach it was totally passive until the day we closed, and the owner handed me the keys to a unit that had an AC broke. My plan was to sell it, but hey, it's still mine today. I gotta go do something, So it's a lot. I'm sure you had that too when like you mentioned that first one, man. You had the manager quit on you, and now suddenly the whole plan has changed. Like the day you closed, it can be tough.
Yeah. And there's a lot more touch points than you think. And that's only I would tell anybody listening that the reason why we found that the reason why people stayed in those communities that were, we call them substandard, was because they felt a sense of community, and they felt a sense of community because they knew the people there. And so from a distance, you have to maintain that sense of community, and you have to do that by constantly touching your residents in different ways, and not just to tell them that they owe you rent or they're not compliant, but you have to maintain that touch and feel. And that's one of the things that we make sure our team does. And they do, I believe they do a pretty good job of it. So we're pretty happy with that.
So if somebody were to get into the industry today and they're trying to buy their first park, what's the number one piece of advice you would give them?
I would say listen to podcasts like this. Try to grab as much information as you possibly can. I would Try to find a mentor, somebody that you can talk to, because there's going to be questions that you're going to have along the way, and you want to, that'll just expand your learning, right? Across the board. It'll supercharge you. Find somebody who's made the mistakes that you're going to make, and this way you could at least, you're going to make your own mistakes, but at least you could try to learn from theirs. I think that's key. And then you have to make the decision to do it and jump in one way or the other, whether it's passively as a, you know, LP with somebody, or you're going to take, like you did, you're going to jump in with a couple of guys, and you can say, hey, I'm going to make this work. So you have to define what kind of investor you want to be, but just, make sure that you find the right mentors, and then you just got to do it.
That's awesome. What would you, and on that note, what would you say is the biggest difference in your day as Frank when you went from having one park to having 10 plus? Like, what was the difference in what you were doing?
Pulling yourself out of making every decision. And so, as you scale, and I know you have like 280 units now, and you've scaled, and there's different levels of growth. And what takes you to, say, the first 100 units might not be what takes you to the next 400. And then what takes you from 500 to 1,000 is something different. And so somebody once explained this to me, you know, like a rocket ship. When a rocket ship goes up in the air, it carries all this payload, and then the higher it goes, the more it has to let go so it could go higher. So you have to realize what you can let go of, and then what you need to focus on. So this way you can continue your growth. So putting the right systems and processes in place, and then trusting the people that you have to make sure to make those decisions. So this way you're not getting caught up in every, you know, minute detail, because then you'll never be able to grow.
Yeah, it seems like you have to work on yourself just as much as you do your portfolio because, I mean, for me, the first 5 deals, it was brute force. I mean, the banks wouldn't work with me because I was an E4 coming out of the Navy. Like I'd never done this before. I never managed a park before, so I was just doing everything, just pushing through. And then I realized like I can't. There's guys out there with hundreds of parks. They can't possibly have done it this way, for the hundred. So there's got to be a better way to do it. And as soon as I started, connecting with more park owners, it's simplified my life, and I started realizing how much I was doing wrong, and I was like, okay, it makes sense. Unfortunately, I had, put myself into a corner where the whole thing kind of relied on me for everything. But to your point, as people out there listening to this and they're trying to grow, what you're saying is exactly right. You have to do less to be able to do more.
Yeah, but by doing everything you did, because we did the same thing, just like you, and I think that's what, when I heard you on the podcast, resonated, right? Because we did the same exact thing. It's by doing that, when you put somebody else in that place, you have enough knowledge to know, like, all right, maybe I can guide you in a different direction because I made that mistake, right? So it's good that
Yeah.
you did it, but it's also better that you know that now it's time to step back.
Yeah. It's, you have to grow, and everybody, I haven't met a single entrepreneur who just talks about their journey as just like a staircase that they just went straight up. So to me, it's a rite of passage. I'm fine with it. And the other good thing is that it taught me about what I like really, really know. I mean, people could sit down and grill me on something, and banks do that, investors do that. And like looking back on all those experiences where I was frustrated at the time of having to do this, and like, why am I out here fixing, a leaky faucet? Like, how am I? And this is not what I wanted, but it taught me the ins and outs, and I'm sure you've kind of experienced that too, to where what when you hire a contractor, you know if they're telling you the truth or not. If a broker's telling you something about a deal that just doesn't sound right, you've been in them enough, you've floored these homes, you've done all this stuff to where you're just like, this doesn't jive right. And in the long run, initial struggles are definitely super valuable.
Yes, absolutely. It's the best learning experience in the world.
Yeah. Well, Frank, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with me here today. If people are listening to this and they say, "Hey, how do I get in touch with you? I want to hear more about what you're doing. I want to collaborate." What's the best way for them to do that?
So you could check out our YouTube series, Trailer Park Turnaround, which will kind of give you a visual series of what we do on the ground, and shows you what's happening there. And you could also message us at trailerparkturnaround.com, and you could send us a message. Happy to sit down and talk with anybody. If you have a park, you have questions. One thing I'll always talk about is mobile home parks. The only problem is once I start, I might not stop.
Yeah, that's how it is with me too. Every time I do one of these, I don't need if it's not a mobile home park person, I really have to like sit there and think and get some notes. But with mobile home park people, it's like I don't go to family dinners and like talk about this stuff, like I don't get that luxury. And you probably it's the same thing. It's like general public is just so like I can tell you how many times I tell people what they do. Like, you sell houses? It's like, no, that's but anyways, Frank, I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you, great getting to know you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.